Check out the top 10 well-known movies that were banned for being too disturbing. While some movies are exciting, others explore issues so disturbing that they aren't permitted. Hello, my name is Serge's Mike, and welcome to The Shining. So, what are these movies? Why are these films so difficult to watch, and why were they banned? 1. The Bunny Game, 2010. Adam Raymeyer's low-budget horror film The Bunny Game debuted in 2010. In the film The Bunny Game, Rodleen Getsick plays a drug-addled prostitute named Bunny, who is kidnapped by a truck driver and forced to participate in games of intense pain and sexual assault. Due to its numerous gory and upsetting sequences, The Bunny Game was deemed unacceptable to the public by the British Board of Film Classification, which resulted in its ban from the country. The majority of The Bunny Game is devoted to the abuse of the abducted woman, the board explained in a statement when explaining its decision to reject the proposal. The work's main theme is the persistent physical and sexual abuse of a defenseless lady, in addition to the man's sadistic and sexual enjoyment from this. Simply speaking, there might not be a single iteration of The Bunny Game that would pass approval with British censors. 2. A Serbian Film, 2010. A Serbian film, often referred to as a Srpski film, clearly draws inspiration from past atrocities for its on-screen bloodshed. A Serbian film, which tells the tale of an adult film star who is tricked into playing a more vicious role in a film, has become known all over the world as one of the most violent horror films ever produced. The film's most graphic scenes, which include the murder and rape of a newborn baby, sex with corpses, and a climactic scene in which the protagonist is duped into abusing his own child, are extremely offensive. Numerous nations, including as Germany, Brazil, and Norway, banned a Serbian film. Although it is still prohibited in some countries, those that have allowed its release did so after extensive editing. 3. Grotesque, 2009. Koji Shiraishi directed the exploitation horror film Grotesque, which was released in 2009. It tells the tale of a medical professional with terrible and wicked needs who kidnaps a couple and gradually crushes their chances of survival by making them participate in a bizarre game of torture and pain. Due to its horrific scenes of torture and abuse, Grotesque was banned from theaters in the United Kingdom by the British Board of Film Classification. The BBFC clarified that Grotesque could not be trimmed to meet their criteria and, in contrast to other horror films with a torture concept like Saw and Hostel, lacked a storyline and character development. 4. Mikey, 1992. The ban of Mikey had much to do with overwhelming gore and taboo breaking on film than it did with bad timing. This is an example of how real-life tragedy shapes how audiences view art. Mikey, a 1993 novel about a young adoptive boy who becomes a vicious serial killer, was outlawed in the UK after two 10-year-olds killed 3-year-old James Bulger. Given how horrible the actual crime was, Mikey was clearly guilty by association. Interestingly, in the decades that followed, Mikey's restriction was never lifted. The BBFC argues that even though the film cannot be shown in public, it need only be resubmitted for evaluation and is not necessarily permanently banned. 5. Saw 3D, 2010. The Saw films are notorious for being difficult to watch and for having graphic torture sequences that will make you fidget in your chair and hope you don't pass out. Like all the previous Saw films in this extensive franchise, Saw 3D is vulgar and outrageous, and it was an unfortunate but mildly humorous incident at a 7-year-old's birthday celebration in Massachusetts. It took the theater staff several minutes to understand what was happening and to replace the tape from what they had assumed was going to be Megamind to what was actually Saw 3D. In spite of this, the brutality in Saw 3D led to a brief ban in Germany. 6. The Devils, 1971. Regarded as one of the most contentious movies ever made, Ken Russell's avant-garde historical horror flick The Devils was closely examined for its intense and disturbing content and provoked a strong negative response from reviewers and censors due to its vivid depiction of violence, religion, and sexuality. The film, which centered on a Roman Catholic priest who was accused of witchcraft by a sexually repressed nun, had an X classification in the UK and was denounced by the Vatican. Due to its violence and the widespread belief that it could be harmful to mental health, The Devils was also outlawed in Finland for 30 years. 7. Hostel, Part 2, 2007. Eli Roth undoubtedly intended to take this brutal franchise a step further with Hostel, Part 2, a highly graphic film that celebrates the art of torture. Avoid watching any of the Hostel movies if you are afraid of visiting foreign countries because they show a group of people on holiday going through the hardest times of their lives and struggling to survive. Germany and New Zealand banned Hostel 2 due to its extreme sexuality and unpleasant content. The film was only re-released in Malaysia and Singapore when its most graphic sequences of torture, brutality, and murder were edited out. Also, even though the movie isn't prohibited in this country, politicians in the UK have claimed that still photos from the movie ought to be considered outlawed as late as 2007. 8. The Pypy Tapes, 2007. In this film, a serial murderer with over 800 tapes of himself torturing and killing people is portrayed. The film was made available on demand in 2014 so that viewers could see the kind of disturbing material that was included in it. Now, horror films have an advantage in truly frightening viewers when they use the found footage approach and make them remarkably realistic. Although the Pypy Tapes aren't based on a genuine story, their seeming authenticity and the length of its prohibition were startling. Originally scheduled for release in 2007, it was taken out of theaters and largely kept under wraps for a full 7 years. 9. Slender Man, 2018. 2018 marked the debut of the campy horror film Slender Man, which didn't receive much attention prior to its premiere. The state of Wisconsin outlawed the film Slender Man, which starred Joey King and portrayed the recognizable tall, shadowy monster that hunts down players of his game. Despite not being particularly frightening, the film is well known. Even though you would not expect it, it's really unsettling and eventually quite depressing. One little girl, who was 12 years old, was repeatedly stabbed by her pal in 2014. Fortunately, the young girl survived the incident. The buddy who committed the horrible deed admitted that she felt that Slender Man forced her to stab her companion 19 times. 10. Land of the Dead. 2005. One of the father of the zombie film, George A. Romero's last directing projects was Land of the Dead, the fourth film in his Living Dead horror series, which followed a horrifying undead assault on a group of Pittsburgh survivors in a feudal society. The zombie movie isn't very bloody or violent, at least not compared to other films on this list, but it was nevertheless well received by critics and audiences and ended up being banned in Ukraine. The country's culture ministry outlawed Land of the Dead because it showed cannibalism, which it felt was too similar to the famine that occurred there in 1933, which forced starved people to devour one another in order to survive. Share in the comments which of these films is the most violent. To receive notifications whenever I release a new video, simply hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed this one.